Hello, everyone out there in the world today. This is Erica Swenson Elliott. I want to thank you all that have subscribed and watched my YouTube short videos. It's been really fun to make for the last couple years. I'm trying to start creating some longer content and get some things onto the historical record that I have found in my family's archive of newspapers, letters, photographs. This particular one I'm going to focus on today, I discovered when I'm working on finishing up my uncle's, great uncle's World War II biography. If you want to get notifications, specifically when the book comes out, you can go to my website, ericaswensonelliott.com, Tales from the Storykeeper. Um, we'll get more into his book in a little bit. I want to tell you about this 1920 publication from the Philadelphia Press Sunday Magazine issue. And this is what I'm going to read to you into the record here that I found in my grandmother's lifetime newspaper collection. Um, I'm terrible at pronouncing names, but this is a general who was interviewed by an American. He was a Russian general in World War One, otherwise known as the Great War. And it was very interesting to read in here 2025, which I can't believe we're all in. 2025, it's January 18th, and I'm happy to be here with you reading this. I'm going to just do a little bit of picture on the background here about what the Philadelphia Press was. It's a defunct paper now. It was published in this era. It was like this one I have. I'm going to show you the cover of it. You can see, you can find some of these on eBay. I didn't find this particular one. This is February 22nd, 1920. So you can see that it was right before it was stopped publication in October of 1920. So it's in between the wars. My grandmother and grandfather were 7 years old at the time, so this was definitely a newspaper that their parents had and was passed down. The person that did the interview was this man, Edward Marshall. And I didn't know about him. He's the one that wrote the article. And, this is before television, radio. Not everyone even has a radio yet. They started to come more in the 30s in America. So he was famous for doing these interviews with famous men. I think he worked for the Hearst Corporation and was a reporter for the famous Hearst newspaper empire. So he was definitely like a freelance, I think, not working specifically for the Philadelphia Press, so it was picked up by them. Okay. This is the man that Mr. Marshall is interviewing and putting it on the record in 1920. And his name is very difficult for me as an American to pronounce. So one of his names or monikers was the Count Speransky. I can say that easier than his full Russian name. He was actually born in this town, Poltava or Poltava in the Ukraine. At the time, it was part of Imperial Russia. So it's 1875 he's born. So this is after our Civil War in America, and you can see he died in the state of Florida at a pretty ripe old age of 79. I had to go look up how to pronounce his name because to me, as an American, it'd be Cantacuzene. So here it is.
Cantacuzene,
Cantacuzinash.
Cantacuzene,
Cantacuzinash.
Cantacuzene,
Cantacuzinash. I'm gonna do it one time slow, then we'll go back and I'm gonna try to read it to you. Here we go.
Cantacuzene,
Cantacuzinash. Okay, so that was my best. This is pronouncenames.com. I found this today when I was trying to find his name. So at least I won't be totally butchering it. We can come back and play it again. So Prince Mikhailovich Katakuzinaj is who we're going to be reading his words. And so if it's 1920, he's now survived World War I or the Great War as a Russian general, and he's being interviewed by an American reporter. What is to happen in Russia? I asked Prince Katakuzinaj. This is Edward Marshall writing in dialogue. The prince was one of the most important visitors who have come to the United States from the vast and tortured nation since the signing of the armistice. He answered, "That depends upon America." So his response, what is going to happen to Russia? That depends upon America. The prince's views must be particularly interesting, not only because of his personal distinction, but because the fact that his wife, the princess, and his companion during his recent dramatic escape from Russia is no other than the brilliant Julia Dent Grant, Grant. And I'm adding some pronouns in here to help explain who we're reading about. Julia was a direct descendant of the great American General Grant from the Civil War. And it's a circumstance certain to ensure the prince his deep knowledge of American history and ideals and wide acquaintance with this country and its personalities. The prince said, "Of all the nations in the world today, Russia is the most unhappy. The sorrows of the balance of the universe are beginning to clear, but Russia's constantly are thickening, and few seem to remember that she was plunged into them as the rest of her world service in the World War, while still fewer seem to understand that until they are clear, there can be no actual safety in the world. Russia may be remote, but she is vital and tremendous, and she is the theater of a new intrigue, which may nullify all the world imagines it has gained through its 4 years of sacrifice." So I'm going to read that part again. Russia is involved in 1920 here in a theater of a new intrigue, which may nullify or make void the world, what the world imagines it has gained through its 4 years of sacrifice. And I'm assuming in the Great War is what he's referring to. It will be especially something more, I think, than any nation has ever needed anything. If there shall be such a misunderstanding of the circumstances as will lead to a withdrawal of comprehension and assistance. But in fact, there is today in progress in America a most extraordinary anti-Russian propaganda, which I shall do my best to counteract. It is not American, in fact, though it appears to be. It is as German as the bullets, which before your brave boys began to fight at all, killed our Russians, young and old, literally by millions. So the Russian general is putting forth, I'm going to read that part again, and this is again in 1920 after the end of the armistice of the Great War. But in fact, there is today in progress in America a most extraordinary anti-Russian propaganda, which I shall do my best to counteract. It is not American, in fact, though it appears to be, but it is as German as the bullets, which before your brave boys began to fight at all, killed our Russians first, young and old, literally by millions. He continues, So again, it's kind of weird since it's 2025 reading these words from before World War II. The prince said, continued, if America does not proffer help at this time, Russia may fall finally and completely victim of that psychological disease which men are calling Bolshevism. And that plague is contagious. Again, if America does not proffer help at this time, 1920, Russia may fall finally and completely victim of that psychological disease which men are calling Bolshevism. And that plague is contagious. Let it spread into control of Russia, and it will become not a threatening, but an actual world danger from the effects of which America will not escape. I know that, in the opinion of most Americans, Russia may be blamed for the origin, and spread of Bolshevism through the world. But that, I am quite sure, is a mistaken thought. The first martyrs of the Bolshevists were Russians. Do not forget that. I think I'm just going to take a little pause here because this is very like intense to me. This is the dude talking, and this picture of him is a little older. I think that's closer to his 50s. If I come back, let me see if I can show you the photo that's in the picture that's accompanying the article. I don't know if you can see that. I just popped up another window, but this is the photograph of him at the time of the 1920 interview. So he looks more like 45-ish, 50 when he's saying this. Let's see if I can say it again. Cantacuzene. I think it was kind of good. Okay. And this is interesting from my perspective because, well, I'm going to do a little insert and promote my book here that's coming up. This is the next one, Pursuing Pete, A Hidden Hero's Journey to World War II Front Lines. So this is my great uncle that was killed, and that's his flag behind me and his picture with the pipe that a lot of you have seen on the YouTube shorts if you've been watching them over the last couple of years. But his mother and father were born in this kind of area of that Eastern Bloc nations that today is the southern border of Poland, Florinka, Poland. At the time, it was the Austrian Empire when my great grandparents were born and living there. So they came over like late 1890s, and there's a previous video I made a Pete of like that whole journey you can listen to. But this whole area is very close. And so this is Pete is born in 1906. So he's 14 years old and in high school or, middle school when this, interview is being done. Okay. So I think this is like more context, that was leading up into this. So I'm going to come back to the prince here. Okay. So he's born in what we would call today Ukraine, but in his mind, at that time, he was born into Imperial Russia and not the USSR Russia, but before the revolution, Russia. And so this part is what I find really interesting. I will say now later to expand upon the subject, or I'm going to back up to this paragraph before. I know that in the opinion of most Americans, Russia may be blamed for the origin and spread of Bolshevism through the world. But that, I am quite sure, is a mistaken thought. The first martyrs of the Bolshevists were Russians. Do not forget that. So I'm calling him the prince, but in reality, he's a Russian general that fought in World War I alongside us against the Germans. So he's, speaking from that experience as well. I will say now, later to expand upon the subject, that every well-informed Russian knows that Bolshevism is not Russian, knows that it is the manifestation of a successful plot against Russia, knows who made the plot and thrust it forward, knows who really is responsible for and hopes to profit from the efforts which are being made to propagate the godless and destructive doctrine here and elsewhere, far outside of Russia. Again, Russia is not Bolshevist. Russia is the victim of the Bolshevist. And it is your job here in America and that of the Englishmen and Frenchmen, of Italians, and of men of every nation except one, which fought with the Allies, to see to it that Russia gets help for the resistance of further efforts at her life, upon the ground, if upon no other, that the success of Bolshevism in my Russia will endanger the very foundations of society in your America and everywhere. Again, 1920. In the old days, you of the United States and the people of the Allied countries put halos around the shining faces of those who had accepted martyrdom that others might be free. That's before World War II. But now you are penalizing Russia because she has suffered and still suffers in a battle which is not more hers than yours. This is so we have like him labeled here Prince, but it's Russian General Cantacuzene. Getting, I think, better. I'm sure there's people that can do it better than me here. It amazes me that you do not see plainly that this war in Russia is a part of the Great War. And he's talking about the Bolshevik Revolution seizing power from the Imperial Old Russia. It amazes me that England, France, and Italy do not comprehend that the success of Bolshevism in my Russia will be a German triumph coming after the strange, puzzling armistice which ended the war, exactly by the extraordinary dictum in a quote, peace without victory. Bolshevism was a terrible political device invented on and here, I'm going to practice this, the Wilhelmstrasse, the Wilhelmstrasse, which was the center of German politics, a street known from the late 1800s to 1945, where the German political power juggernaut remains. So he's saying that the concept of Bolshevism was cooked up in the political halls of the Wilhelmstrasse. And it was for the destruction of the greatest enemy of Germany, which is Russia. And it was most effective. Gott, I don't know how to do that. GOTT. As a German might remark, why not try it elsewhere? Some of the agitators may be actual Russians, trained by Germans to the task, and many of the Bolsheviks, they may be Germans, masquerading as Russians. If this country is to uphold civilization, meaning America, it should uphold civilized and developed Russia, intellectual and able Russia, the Russia which the Germans fought and which the Bolshevists now hate and are endeavoring to crush. And they didn't, this whole article, they don't put a K in. He's pronouncing it Bolshevists, STS at the end. And I think we today put like KS at the end. And then he continues, from the Imperial Russian Army. This educated and developed class, heavens, what have been its sufferings? Murder has been the lot of tens of thousands of its men. Rape has been the lot among its women of who have not died of hunger, fear, privation, or succeeded, often as by miracle and after untold hardship in making their escape. Of the nation's 180 millions, and they do use plural back then, this educated class formed not a large proportion, but it was the leaven which saved the situation. So he's calling the educated class of Russia saved the situation. Mind you, I am not speaking of the aristocratic class I said the educated class. Destroy your own educated class as ours has been destroyed. And what could you expect of your own future? What could the world expect of it? You would lose your doctors, your scientists, your industrialists, great and small, your teachers, your merchants, your factory managers, even the foremen in your industrial establishments. At Omsk, OMSK, our journey seemed likely to come to an end, which probably would have brought an end also to our lives. The engineer approached the headman of the train loads, saying, quote, so the engineer of a train trying to leave, I think his family trying to leave, and this is later on in this article, if you go to Wikipedia, it talks about he had like a daring escape from Russia. So the engineer approached the headman of the train load, saying, if you will take my wife and my children so that they can go with you to safety, I will run the train to Irkutsk for you. Irkutsk. I don't know how to say that. If you won't or can't make room for them, I shall stay where we are. That would have meant that the train and we never would have got to Irkutsk, which was just less than 3,000 miles away. We agreed to his suggestion and in some way made room for his family. And he made the terrible 10 days run without once getting off of his engine. Then he did not get off. He was taken off, utterly collapsed. He went from the train to a hospital. And days later, I talked with him and found him nerve shattered. That indicates the anxiety of the refugees to get away from the mild, quote, mild and gentle Bolshevists who have announced that they propose to reform the world along humanitarian lines. The ordinary educated man, I don't mean the titled personages of the old regime, fears to be held back of the line as one fears death. The ordinary educated man is the one with the deepest fear. It is the fear of death indeed. These men make up the class whom the Bolshevists say that they will organize and keep the class of well-trained workmen such as this engineer. And as a matter of fact, they flee as anxiously as anyone. We never shall forget that railway journey. The suffering of the women and children on the train was terrible. Each car had a little stove in it, but although we ran through forests, there was little fuel because the women and children could not cut it, and the men were too few in number, and they were unable to supply enough. So the fires often were out, and when they were not burning, the temperature in the cars was way far, far below zero. So if you remember the movie Dr. Zhivago, there's a scene where they're fleeing on a train with like the little heaters in there, and they were going east in that movie. I think he was coming west because he got to America fleeing the Bolshevists. So that was the same. If you watch that movie again, it might be more meaningful with the Dr. Zhivago movie. I saw on all this train load practically no children under 10 and no old people beyond 55, which I find kind of funny that 55 is old. The reason for this was tragically obvious. The weak were dead. At first, I thought they had been left behind and suggested this to one who knew. No, was the reply. They have gone upon a longer journey. Oh, a far, far longer journey, meaning death. Around the refugees, of course, typhus and other epidemics raged. For epidemic sufferers, the only good work was done by the American and Canadian Red Cross, which is interesting that they're inside of Russia at this point after the revolution. I didn't really realize that. I knew they were in France, like post World War I, but not there. But fate had done its worst, for typhus is the one disease the germs of which are not affected by frost. So cold winters wouldn't kill typhus off. And you'd have to go look up typhus. I think it's like related to livestock. Rolling stock was precious as gold. It meant life. But many cars had to be burned because they were infected. Straw with which to make beds for the refugees, even for the sick, was not to be obtained for love or money. The food situation as we left was dreadful. Supplies seemed utterly beyond all save the very rich and were scarce at any price. 10 or 10 US dollars or 15 will exchange for about 4 or 5,000 rubles. And again, this was in 1920. And instead of spelling ruble like we do in modern time of ruble, he was spelling it with an O included. But the ruble has little value. Stew for lunch costs 150 rubles per person. I bought a saddle and I sent my Chinese boy to get an empty sack to put it in. And for this old sack, he had to pay 100 rubles. So apparently he had a servant that was a little Chinese boy working for him. There is a saying now very popular with the peasantry in general. It is claimed that the old government was rotten, but bread used to cost 5 kopecks a pound, or Kopekes, so maybe like 5 cents a pound. Now it costs 45 rubles. The Red Army, the communists or the Bolshevists, really is very strong. Its discipline is powerful, and it is the only fighting army left. A peace made with the Soviets will mean nothing, though. Their promises have been empty from the start. I hear much talk of Bolshevist propaganda. The Bolshevists are not honestly trying to make converts, but they are trying to arrange new fields for fighting, loot, and rape. They are without idealism. Any propaganda which they carry on is selfish, brutally so. Russia is not the only loser when this educated class of Russians is destroyed. Educated Russians have done something for the world, as everyone knows. Can you lend your encouragement and recognition to a movement which regards mental grasp and spiritual distinction as the mark of Cain? And for those of you that haven't grown up reading the Bible stories, Mark of Cain is a reference to Cain and Abel, the first two sons of Adam and Eve. And Cain killed his brother Abel out of jealousy and darkness of heart. And so that's the mark of Cain, is like he was marked, you know, I think on his forehead by the angels and sent away into like live on away from the Adam and Eve other descendants. So, Mark of Cain. So, coming back, can you lend your encouragement and recognition to a movement which regards mental grasp and spiritual distinction as the mark of Cain, identifying those who must be utterly destroyed? So, like the hypocrisy, right, of the Bolshevists. This nation of America always has declared for education. So, why allow the Bolshevists to kill all the educated folk in Russia? Will you countenance the penalizing as a capital crime of the possession of education? Do you wish to be a party to a movement which declares its unalterable program to be a march through blood toward the survival of the unfit? And so when he's like, do you like me? I think he's talking specifically to America, like, do you want to be um party, or like you're not saying anything to be against it, so you're like supporting a movement of the March of Death because you're not fighting back the Bolshevists. Then the general, let's see, Cantacuzene goes on. He says, I am by no means favorable to the return of the old regime in Russia, meaning the czars and the imperialism of Russia. I see its terrible mistakes, but we cannot stand by with complacency while enemies of Russia plan with greedy brains for her utter conquest through an artificially imposed weakness, economical, political, and financial. Suppose your populists have joined hands with a group like your Haymarket rioters and strengthened through funds and leadership supplied by those outside who wished later to exploit you, had tried to wreck you morally, financially, industrially, politically. Would you not have begged old friends at least to keep hands off and not to recognize the enemies of your law and order progress and prosperity? The enemies of everything American, who would seize your all through clever penetration and exploit you to your ruin and the peril of the world? How is it possible that any of the allied nations of America or America should trust the Bolshevists? Their principle is to promise everything and never keep their words. The trouble with their opponents, Russian and Allied, is that they have kept their words. If Kolchak, I'm not sure who Kolchak is, Kolchak, promised something and then failed in his performance, France, England, and America jacked him up and made him do as he had promised, even though the doing might spell almost ruin for him. On the other hand, the Bolshevists have not been and cannot be jacked up by anybody. They have made promises innumerable to their own people and the world, which they have not thought of keeping, but for which they have not been held responsible. For instance, the Russian general continues, they promised 8-hour workdays, and now it is 12 hours. For instance, they promised mighty wages and have paid them in a currency so utterly depreciated that when paid, they have had no purchasing power worth mentioning. They promised an industrial democracy, and when the workers threatened to strike against injustices, their meat and bread cards are taken from them. So it wasn't even the cash. It's like, you have to have a coupon to be able to even collect meat and bread. It's almost done now, this article. The future alliance, as I see it, is Germany with Japan, with Russia as the connecting link. And this is, I found really interesting too, because I'm doing my World War II research here. And let's see if I, here we go. Here's some of his letters, postcards. This is his writing. And he's writing to my grandparents, his brother and sister-in-law. So this Russian general is predicting in 1920 that Germany and Japan are a future alliance and that they're trying to bridge and connect through Russia. And the way they're going to do that is, and according to the general's concept and his experience in history, is that Germany helped to create the Bolshevists, to send them in as the revolutionaries to conquer the Russian people by destroying the educated class. So that way they could build a link across to Japan. Now, why is Japan and Germany already connected? I don't know at this point. I found that very fascinating. But then it's also what happened during World War II. And that was something when I was young, I never really understood. I couldn't figure out why they would suddenly want to be allies when they were so different in personalities from each other and cultures from each other, and they were so geographically far apart. So it seemed like it wouldn't just happen overnight. And now I'm reading this 1920 article, and no, it didn't happen overnight. They were, this Russian general was seeing it, before his eyes and his experience through the Great War and living and escaping from the Bolshevist Red Revolution. So he continues, that connecting link between Germany and Japan through Russia will be rich beyond the dream of avarice, a feeder to both ends, meaning Germany and Japan, powerful when organized and trained by such efficient education as the Germans will control, beyond anything yet known in all of the world. Again, such a grouping of the Slavs and the Teutons, and Slavs would be a Russian reference to Russia, Slavic, Slav, which is what my uncle Pete Snowich was. And the Teutons, Teutons, a reference to Germany, the Teutonic Forest, the Teutonic history. So a grouping of the two of them, as to me, the Russian general seems sure, unless someone among the Allies shows some wisdom, no stand could be made save that of gallant fighters doomed to die. And this is where it ties back into Pete's story. He's one of, millions that was killed in this war to stop it too late. So like we definitely in America were ignoring and not taking warnings like this Russian general who was now living and married to the daughter of an American general and living in America after this fleeing and escaping from Russia. Um, like what could have been different? Like World War II might not have happened in this way if like that if people like him had been taken seriously of what they were saying and experiencing. So I'll read that last one again. So this grouping of the Russians and the Germans with the Japan alliance, to me, the Russian general in 1920 seems sure, unless someone among the Allies shows some wisdom, no stand could be made save that of gallant fighters that are doomed to die. And again, I think about like my Uncle Pete was doomed to die because of all this ignorance in the, two generations before when he was a kid. In the face of this gloomy picture, I asked the prince if he had made some suggestion of a way by means of which the world disaster might be escaped. And that was the question by the interviewer, Edward Marshall, who was working for the Hearst Foundation at the time. And the prince or the general replied, I'm sure there is one. If it is to be followed, the United States must take the lead in a new Russian policy among the Allies. And if the others will not follow her, meaning America, and they must tread the path alone. I believe that the United States will be compelled to leadership when all the balance of the world is literally on fire. Like how to me it was like this is like so predictive prophecy. I hope she, America, will not wait until the great fire, or he uses the word conflagration, comes because then it will be too late to save her own property from the great conflagration, her property and her ideals. Russia would be to the United States a valuable friend. In your Revolutionary War, meaning our American Revolution, 1776, Russia was asked to help against the Americans by the English, and Russia declined. In your Civil War, Russia's fleet came to New York to help, while certain other nations overseas showed sympathy not with the North, but with the South. When the United States proposed the open door in China, Russia earnestly supported her, while England and France both were in opposition. When the dispute with Great Britain occurred over the Alaskan boundary, Russia ransacked all of her records and furnished to America the evidence upon which America won her very notable victory. And you can kind of go back and do your own research or, review and dig it up, but he's referencing here when we bought the the Alaskan boundary, and I didn't even remember Great Britain was involved, but like that's how we have Alaska today, that Russia was the one helping us prove that we had rights over and not the British colonial empire of Great Britain. So I didn't know that. That's not taught in our schools. So I think it's very interesting. It's here in this newspaper article from 1920. There are four instances of Russia's friendship for America. Russia never asked return for her good feeling. In 1917, when Root went to Russia, ROOT, I'm not sure who that would have been for us, maybe an ambassador, Russia accepted him as a potential savior. He might have been just that and wished to be, and Russia knew and knows it. Copyright 1920 by the Edward Marshall Syndicate, Inc. So I've done my research on the copyright newspapers. I think up to as of this year, 2025, that copyright's no longer valid because uh, it's like 1928 and earlier is now in the public domain. So it's okay to show images of that. So I just want to get that on record. I thought it was an important like historical reference, and I found it interesting to read from so everything that's going on today and how there were voices speaking up of their opinions. And this isn't the first opinion I've heard about the going back and forth between the Germans and the Russians specifically. So food for thought. It's always good to read different people's views, I think, and it gives you a broader perspective. Um, Besides I do have some other books. If you like, I wanted to show you, I think I should show you this one first. Probably the true stories. If you want to come to my website, you can look at some of the other books I've authored. This is my husband's autobiography. I did not write this one. He worked with a professional business writer. I just did the formatting and I expanded it, added some lists in the back, indexes, and some more color and commentary when we did this paperback version. But that's a business true story memoir. And then I wrote these two. This is my business memoir of my own life as a CPA and my career helping individuals with their taxes and other financial planning. So if you like kind of inspiring, wrapped in true story, it's definitely a hybrid book. I tell about our love story, how we fell in love and with each other and how we met each other. So it's not just all cut and dried business. And then also my last little pitch is I do I don't do any more new tax preparation work. I have my little client base, but I do help people just on Zoom calls or phone calls if you don't want to, be on Zoom. But this is all about US taxes, retirement, cash flow planning, trying to recover economically, got a big cash flow. So you could always connect with me about that too. Enjoyed doing this with you. And I'm going to keep trying to get my grandmother's newspaper. There's interesting things told from a different perspective at a different time. So I'm going to keep trying to get them on the record. And the hat I'm wearing today is a little French beret, and that is in homage for this French spy. I'm giving a little bit of, I want to give her a huge amount of credit. Madame Farsad's War is the book I found out about her role as the head of the largest of the French resistance spy networks. And she ended up, this is a drawing I did of her, and then this is of England and the English Channel and Normandy, France. She ended up being in London for about a year when she was trying to salvage the French resistance network. So she ended up being able to, I think she was there from like July of 43, and she worked and reported directly to MI6. She had about 3,000 spies in France, and about a third of them were killed. So she was an amazing woman. I just wanted to, and that's my little Madame Prasad hat on. Oh, one of her spies in her network, if you read her book by Lynn Olson, he was the art director, I think at Carentan, and he was right along the coast. He made a 55-foot long hand-drawn map of the entire Normandy coast that was flown over to Madame Farsad and given then to the Allies in their preparation for the D-Day invasion. So it was super detailed, and probably saved lives from the fact that how bad it already was. And then he got the map out just in time because I think he was taken into prison in his town like 24 to 36 hours after he had given the map to be flown over to her as the head of his network. So I think that was a really interesting story too. But Like when I'm going back to and reading 1920, like you can see like all the pieces like piling up, and I feel like we're at that point again today. So I thought I would share that with you. Thank you so much for listening.